Get people rolling.
Let them know. Be there, be square.
Ah, why is it facing us? Ah, that's gonna be on there.
Here, do you want me to pull this out?
Alright.
It's running?
Thank you guys.
Alright, we did it.
I used to live in Naquemanon Township. All I know is that they got a heck of a lot more than they need more cash. The talk with Leanne, with my ex-wife, she mentioned they had already had a foot.
What a cool thing to be a part of.
And being a weather person, I know the difference of a northeast with an upslope wind. The Naquemanon and Spring and Dale or Marquette may not have as much. Naquemanon and Spring are going to have, so much more. By the way, congratulations on your Thank you. Thanks.
Our presentation tonight. Thank you all for sitting through our business meeting for the last hour. Apparently I'm not supposed to hype this up too much, but I do promise it's going to be a little bit more exciting than, financial reports and stuff like that. I don't know. I like that kind of stuff, but it's going to be a little bit more fun. So I'm going to let our panelists present or introduce themselves in just a moment here. But our theme of the evening is teaching trees, trout, and trails. And we have with us tonight 4 representatives of organizations, 4 of the 20 partners that we work with for the Dead River Community Forest Project. So I'll let them introduce themselves here. Perfect. In just a minute, but I'll start off by giving a little bit of an introduction to the Dead River Community Forest. I know you have all heard us say the words Dead River Community Forest several times this evening, but raise your hand if you have never heard of the Dead River Project before tonight. 1. Yay! All right. I'm going to talk to you about what's going on tonight. Thank you. So, our Dead River Community Forest Project is really the epitome of what UP Land Conservancy is becoming as an organization and what we want to be. It is going to be the purchase and partial donation of a total of 185 acres of land in the Dead River Valley, the majority of which is 161-ish acres that are directly adjacent to our Ville-Marie-Peters Conservation Reserve, which so many of us know and love. Has anyone here been to the Ville-Marie-Peters Reserve? Oh, that is a lot of hands. That is fantastic. We've got 4 miles of trail, almost 5 miles of trail on the Ville-Marie-Peters Reserve. It's 123 acres. This new purchase will be an additional 161 acres adjacent to that. Everything from the Ville-Marie-Peters all the way up to the banks of the Dead River itself, up north of there. So all told, it's going to be over 300 acres of contiguous, permanently protected forest that is open to our community, not only for hiking and recreation, but we're hoping to, our plan is to make it an educational hub, not only for local elementary schools, but we're working directly in partnership with Northern Michigan University's SHINE initiative, which I'm not going to try to remember what that stands for. Maybe I'll cover that in a minute. But we're working to make this property an educational hub, a center where people from all ages and walks of life can come and engage in lifelong learning. It's the second phase of our Forest for the Future educational program. So we started off with some signage and some building out of our infrastructure last year, and this year we'll really be kicking it into full motion with having a location, having a nature preserve where people can come specifically to learn about climate change mitigation forestry and how as landowners and as individuals, we can all keep climate change and demographic shift in mind as we work with our own properties and kind of expand that impact across the entire Upper Peninsula. So we picked out the 4 T's this evening because they really do encapsulate kind of the 6 major goals of UPLC's next phase. And the reason we're calling it the Dead River Community Forest is not just because the grant that we got to kick off the project is a community forest program, but that is worth being said that this is all being started with a grant from the U.S. Forest Service Community Forest Program. But as part of that program and as part of what we're trying to do here with UP Land Conservancy, the title community forest really says it all. This is a place where we want everyone in the local community, whether visitors or people who are on the property all the time, or whoever is most impacted by the property, we feel should have a significant amount of say in what happens. So we're looking to directly engage the community, the locals of the community, in what you want to have happen out there, whether in terms of forest management or recreational management or just, you know, whatever we do. We want to engage the community. We want to connect people and land, give people a place where, you know, this movement, I guess you can call it, of the last 2 years, where we've all been stepping outside to really engage with our community and get to know the land around us and seek peace and stability in nature. We're looking to make this a place where people are feeling that emotional connection with the land. So we want people to get out and get involved and let us know what they think about it. The Dead River Community Forest is also very important to the local drinking water. In speaking with the DNR and the Department of Energy, Great Lakes and the Environment, or EGLE, the Dead River Community Forest is in the 90th percentile of forests that are important to groundwater recharge, that very specifically cleans the water that turns into the water that is coming out of the taps here, here in the city of Marquette. If any of you are drinking water or beer this evening, the Dead River Community Forest is actually essential to having clean, healthy water for us to drink, for our fisheries to be successful, and for us to have safe places to recreate in clean water. And then, of course, as we'll also be hearing about, a big portion of this is learning about climate change, demographic shift, and how we can be a part of that change in our community and make a positive change. Look at what we want to have happen in the community and really focus on putting that forward. And again, it's all about partnerships. It is about relationships. It's about community. It's not just about taking a piece of land and setting it aside and keeping everybody off of it and trying to freeze a moment in time. It's trying to bring us all together, connect, engage, and learn more about the land that we're working with and make it be an integral part of who we are as a community. So without further ado, actually, one last bit, thank you, for you who don't know about the Dead River Community Forest yet. Oh, can you, is there a map? Yeah, there's the map. So if any of you haven't seen our new maps, again, thanks to UPEC for the grant that helped us create some much better materials than I could produce on my own. The map behind me shows the location of the 2 portions of the Dead River Community Forest that we're looking to create. So the one that I talked about is what we're calling kind of working title. The Bayous portion is the part that's north of the Ville-Medi-Peters Reserve. And then the McClure Basin Association, who's the current owners of the land, are donating 25.5 acres as match to that grant that we got from the Forest Service. So it's huge. They're donating an additional section of land that is A little bit further upriver, but it is, we're calling it the bridges portion for now because it is the segment of land between the old County Road 510 bridge, the new County Road 510 bridge, and then about 24 acres upriver from that. So if any of you have ever seen, I mean, you can Google it. Anytime you Google the words Dead River Fall or Marquette, Michigan Fall, any fall colors you're looking for, you're gonna see a picture of that old historic 510 bridge, and that's the piece of property that we are hoping does not become lawns and, you know, manufactured mansions, and we want that to be nature trails and a scene that our community can keep going back to for our engagement photos, for our wedding photos, for our senior pictures, and that people can keep on maybe not going directly out and parking on the side of the bridge anymore, but having a parking lot and a nature preserve that they can get out, walk through, and then go out onto the bridge and take those really gorgeous pictures up and down the river. So we're super excited about both portions of that. A little bit different goals for each of those properties, but all part of, you know, listening to our community, building partnerships, and saying, hey, we've got this opportunity, we've got this resource, let's work together to make it exactly what we want. So, how do we make this happen? Next slide. Thank you. Number one, we need your input. This is a community forest. We're doing this for community engagement. We're doing it for the community. We are not making all of the decisions. This is done for the exact purpose of doing what you all, the community, want to have happen out here. So, we set up a couple of surveys on our website. They're up there. Please take those surveys, and then we're also hosting a community input session at the Peter White Public Library on March 26th. There's invites scattered all throughout this room. Please come to that if you can in person, and please fill out those surveys. We'll actually be using input from the surveys to form our community input session. That's really where we're going to be leaning into what is going to happen out there. And then the next bit, big news, not the big news that I was telling you about earlier, but big news is we were given a $25,000 one-to-one matching grant just last week that I was told to announce tonight. So from an anonymous donor, you can now double your donation to help us purchase. Our final, I think, is we've got about $90,000, just a little bit over left to go on what we need to have happen here. And right now, until April, so that's about 2 months, you can double your donation. And if we can raise $25,000, this anonymous donor will give us $25,000. So please, please, please consider the Dead River Community Forest as part of your major giving this year. Consider the impact it's going to have on our drinking water, on our recreation, on our education system here in the UP. And there are QR codes scattered throughout the room as well. So please consider making this a donation of yours for this year. Without further ado, I think our first person up is teacher.
Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me if I stay away from the mic?
Yes.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you very much for Andrea, Claire, Emily for inviting me this evening. I'm Adam. I'm a professor here at NMU. I want to tell you a little bit story about how Dead River can be important for teaching, education, and research. So, imagine a forest. Any forest. It could be Dead River, any forest that you've been. Every forest tells a story, doesn't it? What's it like now? What was it like way back when? How did it change? Now, imagine you're standing in a forest, and you have magical powers. And you say, okay, I'm going to suck all the water out of the trees. What am I left with? You're left with biomass, plant stuff. What is that plant stuff? It's carbon, right? Carbon makes up you and me. At some point, that carbon was in the air. That tree took carbon out of the air. Now, when we're thinking about climate change, excess carbon in the air helps hold in heat, and that alters spaceship Earth. So trees can be a very important tool in helping us take carbon out of the air. And generally speaking, bigger trees do a better job of taking the carbon out of the air than small trees do. So let me draw your attention to these 6 objectives. These are the 6 objectives that UPLC has devised for Dead River. I'm going to draw your attention to these last 2, because this is where my part kind of helps fit in, I hope. All right? The Dead River can be important for environmental education opportunities, for students, landowners. These students aren't just kindergartners or elementary school kids. They're high school, and more importantly, or perhaps just as importantly, college kids. College kids at NMU. They're all important members of our community. They can help educate the community on the importance of a river, or of a forest like Dead River. And if we're thinking about mitigating climate change and restoring, well, then we kind of need to know 2 things. We want to ask ourselves 2 questions. What is in the forest? And how much is in the forest? So if we're thinking about those 2, everybody with me so far? So if we're thinking about those 2 questions, then let's bring students out and help us answer these questions. Now, I teach a course in biogeography at NMU. It's for upper level students. What's biogeography? It asks questions like, well, why do we find plants and animals where we do? How did they get there? What's their relationship with the environment? How is that changing? And in this course, they get outside, they learn basic techniques that ecologists, foresters use to help assess the landscape, to help tell the story about what that landscape is all about. So we can kind of do 2 things once we get out to the forest. To answer those 2 questions, what's out there and how much is out there? We can characterize what species of trees are out there. Maple, oak, pine, spruce. And then, through some basic measurements, we can say, well, how much biomass, how much plant stuff is in the forest? It only requires 2 measurements, believe it or not. So let me walk you through how we actually did this. Well, when it comes to biomass, this gives us a good estimate as to how much carbon is on the ground. If we know how much carbon is on the ground, then we can make some estimates as to how well those trees take carbon out of the air. So let's take a quick virtual field trip to Dead River. Now we're jumping in on the bios parcel here, and what you see in a minute are 3 yellow lines that show up. These yellow lines are what we call transects. They're our way of sampling the landscape. We can't go into this landscape and characterize every single tree. And those of you in business, what are 2 or 3 major factors that are limiting for you? Sorry? Terrain? If you're in business, what are kind of some of the major limiting factors that every business owner faces? Money. Time. People. Resources. Right? Equipment. People. Same limitations in science. We don't have the money or the time to do work on every single tree. So if we sample the landscape along these lines, we can get some estimate of what's out there. Now imagine your toolbox at home. It's got that measuring tape in it, right? Maybe 25, 50 feet. Now imagine a really big one that stretches from here all the way out to the parking lot. All right? That's what one of these lines basically is all about. So I took students out here twice in October to actually answer these 2 questions. So you'll see some of these photos are taken by my students, some are taken by my boss, some are taken by me. So let's jump into the forest. All right? Let's look at one of our sampling lines here in yellow. And what we'll do is we'll fade out some of the trees so we can see what's going on here. Disclaimer, no trees were harmed in the making. So imagine these tapes here form a 4-way intersection. So you got 4 corners. You got trees on every corner. There's 1 tree on each corner that is closest to where we're standing. So we identify what those trees actually are. and we measured those 4 trees. Height and diameter and species. So when we're on the ground, I have one student getting diameter of the tree. I have someone who's measuring the distance from where we're sampling to the tree. And we have someone using a fancy tool to get a measurement of the height. So when we think about dominance of the forest, we want to know what's there, how dense are the trees, how far apart are they spaced, and how much is in there by getting the diameter measurement. When we have diameter and height measurements, we can throw those into some equations that other scientists have estimated. They cut down trees, they dried them out, they massed them, they weighed them. And so we have an equation that says biomass equals something related to height and diameter. All we have to do is get diameter and height. Throw those numbers into that equation, and we get some estimate of biomass. Is it perfect? No. But it gets us part of the way there. So here are my students collecting the data. You can see the long tape laid out here on the right. So here they're getting measurements of diameter or density. There's an example of one of those big tapes I was telling you about. And then these are just photos of my 10 students. Those are beautiful 2 fall days out here in October. Am I still good on time? So, what did we find out? Well, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. Students use their data to estimate the dominance of species that are out there. How many are out there? What's their spacing? How much is out there? And then by throwing those values into some equations, we get an estimate of biomass, plant stuff. So, using this data, you're able to analyze and interpret it. Tell the story about what this forest is all about. So, students got a benefit out of this because they learned how to measure forest stands. They learned how to tell the story of the landscape. And then, hopefully more importantly, they collected data that supported UPLC's mission through a unique service learning opportunity, learning in service to others, to another organization. And then hopefully now, UPLC now has 2 things in return. Preliminary data to inform decision making. Where do we go from here with this information, with this story that we have? And a proof of concept that community and student involvement in the forest is both possible as well as useful. And with that, that's my story. Thank you for your attention.
Session. So as we're going through, please be thinking of things that you might want to ask our presenters afterwards. And after they've all gone through, I'll call people out to have their questions come up. Thank you.
All right. Hi everybody, my name is Rexx Janowaik. I am a senior forester at Green Timber Consulting Foresters, and we have been working with the UPLC to help them manage their properties for at least 15 years now. I've done a number of projects for them, and today what I want to talk to you guys about is what we do as foresters, what we consider to maintain the clean water that Andrea spoke about earlier, and how important it is on this Dead River Community Forest property. you know, as you guys know, forests provide a ton of benefits, from recreation, wildlife habitat, carbon sequestration, and one that a lot of people don't give a lot of thought to is how do forests clean water, and how do they provide clean water for us to drink and us to utilize. The primary way this happens is by having all the biomass, the plant matter growing and stable on the site. It helps to hold soil particles, debris in place, and slows down surface water flow from events like 36 inches of snow melting here in a couple months. So, as foresters, it's important that we assess the sites and make sure that the management that we conduct does not disrupt this important mechanism of slowing the water down and filtering sediments and pollutants from the surface water. The roots from trees also hold the soil in place as water is filtering down through the soil into the groundwater reserves. Other benefits that forests provide for water is shade on streams. I got a feeling one of our presenters here will be talking about trout habitat soon and how important shade is to trout habitat. It also provides inputs for the aquatic food chain. Insects feed on the leaves, the woody debris that falls from trees into rivers, and that provides a food source for a healthy fish habitat. So obviously it's really important to protect our riparian areas and maintain this clean water. So what are some things that we do as foresters to do that? Well, it's important to maintain large and old trees along these river corridors. They provide all kinds of habitat. They drop a large amount of leaves. They drop woody debris into the streams and provide all kinds of important inputs. It's also important to retain trees of all sizes to make sure that we hold that soil stable. If we're doing forest management, we do not want to cut right up to the dead river, create a skid trail that channelizes water into the stream and causes all kinds of harm downstream to affect thousands of people. We want to minimize the installation of logging roads and even to some extent some trails and stuff in these riparian areas. And if they are necessary, we want to lay them out in a fashion that protects the water system. A big one now with climate change on the horizon and forest health being such a huge issue is monitoring these forests to make sure they are maintaining their health. We've had issues with the emerald ash borer, we've had spruce budworm move through, we've had big impacts on trees that historically grow in these riparian areas. If we continue to monitor these properties owned by the UPLC and can react to and maybe get ahead and mitigate some of these forest health concerns that might crop up more frequently because of climate change, we can help to maintain the stability of the soils and the clean water that the forests provide. That would likely constitute planting some trees, some shrubs, and other things to take the place of what may or may not be dying. So when we actually implement some type of forest management, maybe we're doing some climate change mitigation to try to push a forest into a more resilient state than it might be in by manipulating the canopy and removing certain trees. There's some things that we need to do to protect the water. The main thing is let's utilize buffers. Any stream, whether it's intermittent stream, whether it's the dead river, whether it's a lake, a pond, we want to make sure that we put a large enough buffer on it that when surface water does flow into this buffer, it's got plenty of time to slow down before it reaches the water, filter the sediments, filter the pollutants out of the water as it flows across and enters the stream. As a guideline, these buffers should typically be a minimum of 100 feet wide. As the slope down to the stream or down to the water feature increases, the buffer should be widened. Again, properly laying out skid trails, make sure that they don't degrade the ecosystem. Considering restricting the harvesting to winter-only conditions. As a lot of us know, when you got 30, 2, 3, 4 feet of snow on the ground, frozen conditions, it does a good job of protecting the soils and lessens the impact. So if you are working in the riparian areas, some more sensitive areas, to restrict to a winter harvest is always a good consideration. And avoid placing landings and high use areas in those riparian areas. Let's get those stuff, that's kind of stuff up and away from the rivers. So, yeah, in conclusion, when the time is taken to learn about the forest, to learn about the site characteristics, assess them properly, and take the proper precautions to protect the aspects of the ecosystem, especially the water resource, which is so important to us. It's very, very possible and very beneficial to implement some sort of forest management to, again, help mitigate climate change, help improve forest health, and also work into some recreational goals.
Well, it's our bright new stand right here. You don't notice it over there. My name is John Highlen. I have the privilege of being the president of the Waara chapter of Trout Unlimited, and we have the honor and the privilege to work on about 2/3 of the Upper Peninsula right now, as far as cold water habitat and cold water resources. So, anyway, one of the things I want to talk about tonight is how the fact that the connection between Trout Unlimited and the Dead River Community Forest is really a natural connection, and both literally and figuratively. I mean, the Dead River Community Forest ties directly into our mission, which is to protect, reconnect, restore cold water fisheries in our watersheds in the Upper Peninsula for current and future generations. And we've had a lot of talk tonight about both the landscapes and the water. Just one of the things we need to keep in mind is a lot of people like to talk about land and the landscapes. Well, when you really think about it, a significant part of the landscape is the water. And that's really our goal and our mission in this whole project, is to make sure that as we're developing this forest, for everyone's use and enjoyment, that we are making sure that we do it in a way that we're protecting cold water resources. And when we talk about the cold water resources, I think a lot of times we tend to think about the namesake Dead River in this case, right? Well, the other thing we need to keep in mind is, besides the river itself, there's a lot of small creeks on these properties as well. There are creeks that are full-time, year-round running creeks. There are some small ephemeral creeks that only run now and then when they need to drain off excess water and things. But those are some of the important resources too. We talked about the riparian zones and things like that. One of the things we need to keep in mind is the riparian zone goes a lot further than just the strip along the Dead River. If you look at all the different creeks in there, a good share of that forest is riparian zone when it really comes right down to it. And one of the things that I like to tell people is pretty much everyone and everything relies on cold, clean, fresh water. Right? So in a project like this, where we're working to help protect the cold, clean, fresh water, to benefit that cold, clean, fresh water, we're really benefiting everyone and everything. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. As we talk about the Dead River Community Forest, in a lot of cases, this is a much bigger project than I think we initially look at. The fact that it's such close proximity, like we saw when we did the Zoom a little while ago, it's just on the edge of town. When we think about the close proximity it is to town, how easy it is for people to get to it. This is going to be a great place to help give people a quick way to get out into the natural world and enjoy those kinds of things. And a big part, of course, of that natural world, as I mentioned earlier, is water. People are drawn to water. And there's no doubt they're going to be drawn to the Dead River Community Forest in a big way. So it's going to be a popular place. Now, most of us, I think, here realize that the Dead River is anything but dead. Right? There's a lot to that, especially in the area right around the Dead River Community Forest. If you've ever had a chance to get out in that area, it's a beautiful stretch of river. It's nothing like you would envision from the name, or it's nothing like you would envision from where looking at where it enters Lake Superior a little ways downstream. It's completely different. It's a completely different waterway. There's a lot of great resources up in there. So as we're looking at that, one of the things that we're looking at doing when we're working with the UPLC is we're looking at as we develop this property and we lay out trails, which we're talking about here in a little bit. What do we need to do to help protect some of these cold water resources? And of course, the river itself is the border of the property. So, we want to protect the river, but we're not going to be really going out into the river to speak of. But when we talk about some of those small creeks and things, that's where a lot of this work, I think, is going to come in. We're working with everybody as the partners. I don't know how many partners you said there was. There's quite a few partners, 20 different partners working on this. But for instance, one of the main things we're envisioning is to build some small bridges that fit in with the landscape, not eyesore type thing. Think small bridges that fit in with the landscape for wherever we're going to cross these creeks in order to protect the creeks. Now, some of the creeks that are out there, like Midway and Spring Creeks, those are pretty much year-round creeks for the most part. Other than I think this past year, we might have got real close to being not year-round. We had such a severe dryness and such severe drought. But those creeks, they actually hold, believe it or not, can hold quite a bit of aquatic life, including trout. I mean, a lot of people look at these small creeks that most people can jump across, and they think there's not a whole lot there. I've had the privilege before to do some research work and some studies and things on small creeks like that over in Alger County. And you would be amazed at the things you find in some of those creeks. We found lots of brook trout. We found trout up to a foot long in some of these little creeks you can hop across. We found 16-inch salmon in one of these creeks. So these are significant creeks to protect for their own sake, let alone for the sake of the river itself that they eventually flow into. And even the small ephemeral creeks, that run now and then, depending on the snow melt and the rain and so on, those, depending on size, depending on season and temperature and so on, they may or may not actually hold much aquatic life themselves. But what happens in and to those small ephemeral creeks directly affects the larger creeks they feed into and the river as well. So it's all one big network all tied together, not just the creeks, but the landscape that surrounds those creeks and surrounds that river. It all works together. As we mentioned earlier, we talked about the forestry and so on. The whole thing all works together. So anyway, that's one of the pieces that we're looking at bringing to this thing is to work on those bridges and make sure we create those bridges in the right areas as we're working on the trail building and so on, so that we keep that sediment that would be created if people are crossing back and forth across those bridges. We keep that sediment out of the creeks. One of the other things that we're looking at, another piece of that, would be along the river itself. One of the areas that people will need to go through in order to view one of the iconic waterfalls out there is a wetland, not really a wetland area necessarily, but a floodplain, that in a lot of cases, even in times of year when it's not really standing water in there, it's still very wet and it's still very muddy. And being this going to be a very popular place, if we didn't protect that, there'd be a lot of mud churned up in there. And it has channels going directly into, we're talking right along the dead river, there's a lot of channels that go directly into the river. So if we allow people just to be tramping back and forth through there, there's going to be a lot of sediment going into the river, which would definitely negatively affect not only the river in that area, but for quite a ways downstream as well. So one of the other pieces of that we're looking at is to build probably about 80 yards of boardwalk, raised boardwalk, through that low-lying area so that people can get the access that they want to the waterfall, to the river and things like that, without tearing things up, without destroying the habitat out there. So that's a big piece of the project. And one of the other things we're looking at is to put in some access steps to the river itself where we can. Sometimes that gets a little tricky with permitting and things like that, where you can and can't put steps like that in. But a lot of the bank out there along the dead river in that area is, tends to be kind of steep and difficult if you want to get in the water, whether it's to fish or whether it's just to get a close-up look and feel and just enjoy being part of the flow. A lot of those areas out there are very difficult to get in the water. And so we're looking at being able to put in a few access steps where we can readily do that. Again, to help eliminate the erosion and you reduce the erosion and things like that. So anyway, those are a big part of what we're looking to do. And again, we've talked earlier about how the landscape and the water work together. It's all part of the same big system. So, you know, without the water, the landscape certainly would not be, you know, what it is. It wouldn't be the landscape that we've come to, you know, to know and enjoy in the UP. And without the landscape, the water would not, we would not have the clean, you know, fresh, cold water that we have. You know, the two play together. And the Dead River Community Forest, the way we see it, you know, plays an important role in maintaining those healthy waters and healthy landscapes. And this can be a place, we talked earlier about education, a great place for a lot of different education. This is, you know, this would be a great place for people to come out and be able to get a first-hand experience of a lot of these different types of features of the water, a lot of these different types of streams and creeks, and actually get a chance to see and feel and understand how all of this stuff works, how it interacts together, and get a chance to understand, you know, how the watershed actually works, and some of the reasons why it's so important to protect that. We're talking about for the logging and things like that, how important it is to protect those, and why, and some of the different ways we can do that. If you look around Marquette with me, just kind of think about it a little bit. Look around Marquette at the amount of green space that's no longer green due to recent development. Even just in the last few years, even just in the neighborhood right around the near vicinity of the Dead River Community Forest, you look at the changes that have happened. And so, really, doing projects that we're talking about with the Dead River Community Forest to help preserve and protect, you know, the landscape and the important water that's part of that landscape, you know, that's an important part of the development that we need to do as we're expanding. Again, a lot of this is natural expansion. In some ways it's good, but we need to make sure that we're including the green space. We need to make sure we include things like the Dead River Community Forest as part of that development. So again, to make sure that we maintain these healthy systems in our area. So, you know, when we protect, you know, the surrounding landscape, of course, we protect the associated cold water resources that are part of that landscape. And when we protect the cold water resources, of course, we protect not only the surrounding landscape, but the surrounding community that all of us are a part of. So what happens, you know, to the Dead River, what happens in and around the Dead River, you know, not only affects that local area, because it affects the river flows out of Lake Superior, so we're really talking about things that can affect the entire lake and really the entire basin of the Lake Superior. So a lot of people a lot of times don't think how far-reaching some of these things are that we're looking at doing here. It's how important they are. So I think Emily mentioned earlier about pieces of the puzzle. And the way we're seeing this with the Dead River Community Forest, this is one piece, one of the pieces of the Upper Peninsula conservation puzzle that we have the opportunity to put in place. And, you know, when we work together as a group, those 20 organizations and, you know, all of us here in the room and hopefully many, many more, when we work together to put that piece in place, you know, we'll be helping piece together a picture of a healthy, vibrant environment, not only for current generations, but for generations that aren't even here yet. And that is something worth getting involved in. And that's one of the reasons we're involved in this project. So.
They saved the best. I'm Hauswirth. I'm the executive director of the Noquemanon Trail Network. Who needs a grooming report? Anyone? Yes, everything to 510 at Forestville. Single track is getting groomed. They're having fun wrestling snow dogs on the North Trails. So, yes, we've got a lot of projects going on right now and a lot of snow that is keeping us, our groomers, busy. Our organization stewards right now roughly 150 miles of trail across 8 different trail systems. And we work with 45 different landowners on those trails. I think a lot of people think a lot of the trails are possibly a little more secure than they are. We ourselves only own roughly, we have a 15-acre trail, 15 acres are Forestville trailhead, another 40 at the 510 trailhead. We own a random 80 up in Granite Point that we hope to secure just a small easement on. And then we own part of the trail from 510 to about 17 or 15K for those that are familiar with the Noquemanon race trail. So that's a very small piece of the trails that we actually have physical control over. I moved back here roughly just over 4 years ago now. And I think that was when I first started hearing about the Dead River Community Forest. And our involvement started early. Jeremiah Johnston, who's in the back over there, he was working for us as one of our trail builders at the time. Marquette Mountain has since stolen him from us. I know, hey, it happens. And Jeremiah did a lot of wandering out on the land to look at the potential for trails. You know, we really like getting involved with partnerships where the land is secure, the trails will be secure. Trails connect people. I think everybody knows that the more people can engage with the land, the more they have a connection to it. They want to support it. They want to donate to it. You know, let's be honest, dollars help make things happen. In regards to the trails, we just met last week to kind of build on what Jeremiah had looked at. It's been a few years ago, 3 years ago already, to talk further about what the trail build-out could look like on this parcel. I think roughly 2.5 miles, I think, is what we're estimating could be built. What's great is we've got builders on staff. We're a very small staff at NTN, executive director, an office administrator, and we have one full-time builder / facilities guy that does everything else that I don't do. Although I did change the vent on top of the vault toilet this summer. So, nonprofit life. So, you know, it's super exciting. We want to get people on the land. We want to build trails that are sustainable. We want to guide the use on the land. You know, whether it's hiking, biking, nature viewing, whatever it may be, trails can be built to guide that use and make it a special time for everybody that steps on that land. You know, sometimes we want to separate that use. You know, it really depends. We looked at the parcel to see that the lower, we talked about the upper loop and the lower loop. You know, bicycles may not be appropriate on the lower loop. What can we do to filter that down? You know, there's things we can do to minimize the impact of foot traffic, minimize bicycle traffic, sight lines, improve sight lines to make sure that we have some compatibility between users. You know, I think everybody has a bit of a perception of what's compatible or may not be compatible on trails. A lot of it is dictated by the soils, the land, the users. The design of the trail becomes really, really, really important. Jeremiah has volunteered to help do the layout. Right, Jer? We're gonna hold you to that now. So unfortunately, he'll be doing some of the layout and flagging for us, and we'll get a builder out there to help guide the build. But the other thing we want to do as part of that is do volunteer work bees. You know, one thing, getting people out there, getting them out there and get their hands dirty, you know, that connects them, it gives them that ownership of the trail. And, you know, that really makes a difference in how people relate to the land. You know, just, I think we often take things for granted when we aren't directly involved with them and we just expect them to be there. So the more that we can do that in the process of building out these opportunities across that land, I think we're going to have a better product, if you will. And super exciting project. If you have any questions, that was a great segue. That was great. Hand it back to Andrea, but please reach out to me if you have any questions about this project or about the trails or how we maintain the trails for the community here as NTN. Thanks.
All right, it's Q&A time. We did have a couple of people send in questions in advance, so I'm going to ask a couple of quick questions, but after that, if any of you have questions, just raise your hands. I'll point at you and we'll shout it out, okay? So a question that got sent in for Rexx is, how may the trestle crossing at the Dead River Community Forest be incorporated in the management plan, and how might this affect carbon offsets versus timber revenue in regards to aesthetics?
That's a loaded.
I hope so. I hope so.
Well, as far as the trestle itself and how is it incorporated into the management plan, I personally have not seen the trestle, but if we're talking about a crossing here, it's important to maintain the crossing, to protect the water, protect the integrity of the streams. How does it affect carbon offsets? I don't think it does. And in regards to aesthetics, again, not having seen this trestle personally, I'd assume, is it aesthetically pleasing?
It's gorgeous.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we want to do all we can to maintain its historic and aesthetic appeal, and if that means lessening the intensity of forest management, or even put an aesthetic buffer around it to maintain the look of the forest around the trestle, that's something that should be considered and likely implemented.
I'll fill in real quick on that. So for those of you who have seen pictures or aware of the, there we go, of the LSNI trestle, which crosses the Dead River. This is a historic and absolutely gorgeous and still actively in use railroad trestle that crosses the Dead River. It's right on the edge of the property that we're acquiring. So at the request of LSNI, I would like to make it perfectly clear that we are not acquiring land up to the trestle or opening any access over or onto the trestle bridge. We will actually be working with NTN and our volunteers to actually build probably what we would call an aesthetic buffer, if not a gate, to keep people from making that hop, skip, and a jump onto the trestle.
They were particularly concerned about the iron ore pellets that routinely fall.
Yeah, it's quite the experience being down below at this waterfall and looking up as an ore train goes across. But yeah, the pellets do come off of those trails. Does anyone else want to?
Should want to have a viewing area for this trestle.
Yeah. We'll probably, so Jim just said we could have a viewing area as one of the things that John Highlen and Trout Unlimited and I have been talking about, as well as Lori and NTN, about how do we want to build trails and how do we want to manage public use of the property to mitigate any dangers from the trestle bridge as well.
Yeah, just a quick comment. One of the things about maintaining the aesthetics, that's one of the reasons why you have people like Rexx involved. Because I think a lot of times when you think of logging, you think of some of the projects that didn't go so well, but that's not necessarily the norm, because I've been involved in projects before on my own property, where when they come in and they actually do a good job, and you have a forester that actually marks out, usually shortly after, you can't even tell it's been done. And that's the whole idea, is to be able to manage the forest without it looking like a managed forest. So.
Yeah, managing it for improvement.
Yeah.
And then I had another question that came in for Dr. Naito. What did you find out when you were doing your biomass and characterization of the trees? Can you tell us a little bit about the discovery that you guys made out there?
Absolutely. It was interesting. When we look at both composition as well as biomass, the three dominant trees are sugar maple, red oak, and white pine. So I thought about putting those graphs in. I figured that might chase people out, so I keep it simple and straightforward. But that's the answer. Hopefully
yeah, thank you. Anyone else have any questions for any of our presenters? Feel free to. Okay, go ahead, Jim.
I was wondering about the small creeks that are tributary.
Okay.
The Midway and Spring Creek.
Yeah.
Has anybody done any surveys on the bio surveys on this?
We have not been involved in it, but that's something that certainly could be done. As
Northern might be interested in.
Yep. And actually, we work sometimes with conservation districts that do some of that. The macroinvertebrate sampling of the aquatic insect sampling and things like that is a good way. You can get an idea of the quality of the water, because different bugs require different qualities of water to be able to live in there. So that's one of the ways you do that, and a lot of times you do that over a longer period of time. That way you not only get a snapshot of the quality of the water, but you also get the effect of like the canary in the mine shaft, where you can kind of see over time how things are changing, so you have an idea, instead of waiting until there's a problem and realizing, oh, we've got a problem. If you're monitoring things like that, you can, and a lot of times you can see it creeping in that, okay, wait a minute, things are starting to change, you know to start looking for things. So there's a lot of good opportunities to be able to do things like that there.
I'll actually answer a little bit of that one as well. Directly to your question, Jim, about Northern getting involved with that, we actually do have discussions going with the biology department, specifically Dr. Leonard, about starting to do these macroinvertebrate and trout and fisheries kind of surveys out there. They had hoped to start this study, and they are looking at it as a very long-term, probably annual classroom, like integrated into their classroom studies. They'd hoped to start that this fall, but unfortunately the world is what the world is, and it wasn't able to happen this year. But we are looking forward to doing that in the future. Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead.
When you do the biomass estimate of the tree, is there an equation in there to estimate the age of the tree?
You can indirectly assess age from diameter, but we're not quite addressing that. We have basic tools that we can, we can drill a core into the tree, look at the core and figure out the age of the tree, but we didn't want to do all that kind of damage to the trees, especially if we're not. So we're just using equations that other scientists have created. So they come into a forest, they cut down the white pine or the sugar maple or the red oak. They dry it all out. They take out all the water, and then they mass it. They weight it, essentially. And then now you have measurements for diameter, height, and mass. And you can develop a relationship between those three characteristics, and that leads to an equation. And so they publish those equations, and we can use those equations and say, okay, biomass equals something about diameter plus or multiplied by something about height. We throw in diameter values, we throw in height values, the output is mass. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And then also, how long do you estimate it will take to create this trail system?
The trails in there. Do you want to answer that one, Lori? So the question is, how long is it going to take to create the trail system? This was a serious subject of discussion last week.
Yeah, so we're looking at it ideally in 3 parts. I think the discussion, we want to get the trails established as soon as possible. Because we know people are going to be out on the land and they're going to want to be out there, so we want to try to guide that as soon as possible. I think our goal, if things come together and funding and purchase and everything happens soon, we hope to get that upper loop put in this summer, and then we're going to do a little more planning on the lower loop because there is a lot of wet areas and crossings and things, and that'll be more of a hand build and possibly more volunteer focused than the upper loop, which we should be able to punch in pretty quickly because it's a little bit sandy soil and it should be a relatively easy build.
So to kind of build on that answer, a big part of the question of how fast the trails get built, how long it takes us to put in this boardwalk that we're talking with Trout Unlimited about partnering with them to do, the answer to that will be how much money can we raise between now and trail building season, which, as we all know, is short. Our bare minimum amount needed to get this project underway and to get this first loop put in, or at least get things really kicked off, is $318,000. That includes the purchase of the property, includes initial trail building, initial signage, all the staff time, all the contractors and whatnot that it's going to take to actually get the property, and a little bit of money for trail building. If we go above that minimum amount needed by the time trail building season starts, we can do more. So Don't forget that match grant that we've got going, and the QR codes around the room.
Yeah, and when it comes to, you know, trail, so I mentioned we have 3 full-time. We do hire seasonal staff. In the summer we'll bring on builders depending on what projects we can line up. So some of these smaller projects allow us to bring some staff on. In winter it's just grooming staff. That's when we have the most, we have like 4 to 5 part-time that are grooming, but if we can bring some extra hands on in the summer, it allows us to accomplish a lot more. And it truly is a short build season that we're working with here.
I saw Jen Hill, did you have a question?
Well, my question was actually about the training, but I also just, I want to compliment you and ask a question, but I'm really, really, really impressed at the level of coordination that you guys have had, and I think that letting things, it seems like things have taken a little while, because yeah, I've heard about the community forest for a while, but like years. But that's a good thing because it's allowed all this coordination, right? It seems like that piece of not rushing it through, but having people get engaged. So my question is about the fish. Is there, a lot of times we hear about that fisheries have been lost and that we're having to restore. Is this a situation where we're restoring, or is this one of the things that makes the EP so special is that there are still intact, healthy waterways that can support fish? Or is this a place where fish are going to be brought in? Is this going to be about supporting? Like, what do you guys see going forward?
Really, part of that really it relies on the Department of Natural Resources, because they're the ones that do stocking and things like that. We don't have the ability to do any stocking or anything. We certainly work with them to gain information and so on. Right now, I don't know of any plans to do any artificial stocking or anything like that in this area. You know, this section of Dead River is actually a very nice fishery already. It's a beautiful stretch of river, and it's actually a pretty healthy stretch of river. So, you know, one of the things, probably for starters, well, I mentioned, you know, the protection portion of it, as far as, you know, bridges and the boardwalk thing like that. So for starters, we're talking about just not losing any ground, so to speak. Literally not losing any ground into the creek. You know, we don't want to lose any ground where we're at now. But then when we talk about the educational side of things, and we talk a little bit about the monitoring, things like that, that's where that comes in, to understand better where are we at in that quality scale, if you will. You know, are there some things that we maybe need to do as part of our forestry management, plantings, you know, whatever the case may be. So that's kind of like one of the next steps.
Oh, that's a good, one more question. So assuming this probably was logged in the past?
Pretty much the whole UP has been logged in the past.
Yeah. So when was that? Like, when was it last logged?
Well, I'm going to call on our resident historian.
I don't remember.
But he did weren't you the guy in charge of that lawn, the last lawn?
On the Dead River Community Forest?
Yeah.
No.
No, on the Vilmany Peters, yeah.
Peters,
Yeah.
When was that done, do you know?
2000 and, yeah, I was gonna say 8, 2007.
Yeah, and so there are roads in there right now.
That go up and
There's
border this
adjacent
property.
roads, yeah. So a lot of our trail will need to be on that. I think we do know that the current landowners that we're purchasing the property from did try to do, of the bottomlands or the bayou section, did do a small scale timber cut on it maybe 5-6 years ago, somewhere in there. But it didn't go very far. And other than that, I'm not sure if it's, I wouldn't say it's, you know, old growth or second growth or anything like that. It's certainly been a long-term managed forest.
There's a good mix out there.
Yeah, there's some of the biggest aspens I have ever seen in my life, and that says a lot.
Variety and age class both is good. There's a good mix out there.
Yeah, it's a very healthy, beautiful forest. I'll take one more question, and then we're gonna wrap it up because we're getting a little bit past 8. Do you have one more question? Go for it.
All right, so the boardwalk you're talking about is that cedar swamp that's underneath the trestle, right? Is that the area that we're talking about?
Not right under the trestle, but leading up to where you would view the trestle from, yes.
Because the thing is, it's hard to get back there right now, but it's such an amazing experience to be under there, and really once we have trails. And so I just want to say I think it's really important that we do protect that, because there's going to be feet all over there.
Yeah, that's one of the first things we noticed. We did, what was it, December, I think it was, we did a walkthrough. We spent quite a bit of time out there taking a look at the different creeks and along the river things. And yeah, the two big things we noticed were, one, making sure we have proper crossings where all the trails cross the creeks. And the other real big thing was that wet area, and to make sure we protect that. Because you're right, because that the waterfall viewing there, which, let's face it, probably a large percentage of the people that go out there are going to go out there to view the waterfall.
It's spectacular.
Yeah, so it's going to get a lot of traffic. So that is one of the key things we need to do, is make sure we protect that. Otherwise, it'll be an absolute mess in there. And as we talked earlier about the trails, that's one of the important things about the trails and the boardwalks and so on, and the bridges, is to help direct that traffic, to make it as easy as possible for people to take the route you want them to take, so you don't have everybody taking whatever route they want.
Yeah, social trails can become a real issue.
Yes.
And that's why the layout of this is critical when we're trying to guide that. Just a little statistic, we've got a few counters out on our trails, and obviously everybody knew there was an increase in outdoor recreation. We showed roughly a 30% increase between 2020 and 2021, and it held pretty steady last year. And that's significant. That's just rough numbers. There's some variables in there because the prior year also counted events that we had, and those events didn't happen. But 30 in other areas were as high as 40%. So that's a huge increase in expectation that we need to plan for.
And that's UP-wide. Because I've been talking to people from every place from Noquemanon Falls over to the Porkies, and everybody's saying the exact same story about the last few years. Anywhere from 30 to 50% increase in traffic.
Yeah, which changes the way we build our trails and the
Yes.
way we have to manage the property, manage the forest, and stuff like that. So that's why we're hoping to do an educational program simultaneously with the purchase of the property.
And you have to consider where people are going to park their cars.
We're working on that.
Yeah.
We'll get there. Okay, well, I think we're just a little bit over, so last little wrap up for my part is again, again, thank you all so much for being here, for your support over the last year. We are here to talk, to discuss. We've still got our lovely, friendly bartenders to hang out. We think we still have some food, so please, if you're available, keep on hanging out, ask us more questions. And long story short, let's make this happen. We've got a short window of time to make the Dead River Community Forest happen. Like I said, our minimum amount needed is $318,000. All we have left is $90,000, and we just got this $25,000 matching grant. So now is the time to make it happen, both in terms of fundraising, to make the educational program happen, to make the boardwalk happen, to make the trails happen. But now is also the time where we need to hear your input as to what you want to happen out here. We've got a lot of ideas, but before we can actually go ahead and start it, we want to know what you think. So head to our website, answer those surveys, come to the March 26th community input session, and shoot us emails, send us a call, set up a meeting. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you all again, and big round of applause for our
We gotta end this.